hello and welcome to the New Orchid Show. Every moment, without thinking about it, we breathe. But hidden inside this seemingly unconscious rhythm is a mysterious portal, an almost forgotten technology of healing and limitless transformation. Long before we had access to talk therapy, trauma-informed coaching, or even psychedelics, humans knew how to use breath to transition into altered states of consciousness. Shamans, monks, mystics, they all knew how to tune into something magical, something most of us in our contemporary society ignore or simply are unable to see. From an evolutionary perspective, it's possible that this hidden capacity played an important adaptive purpose. It helped humans cope with trauma in communal rituals or individual healing. At times, when used properly, it provided incredible visionary insight or symbolic resolution without needing any external substances at all. History books are full of examples of different cultures all over the world using rhythm and breath in rites of passage, different grief rituals, and conflict resolutions long before modern psychology or pharmacology ever existed. In the 1970s, a Czech psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof banned from using LSD in therapy as the drug was shut down due to legal restrictions, turned to breath, discovering that this built-in system, when used in a specific manner, can reveal the incredible therapeutic and powerful effects of psychedelics. He called this modality holotropic breathwork, holotropic meaning moving towards wholeness. The science behind this way of inducing an altered state of consciousness is relatively simple to understand. By deliberately overbreathing in a deep and rapid manner, the patient or the subject will induce a state which mimics stress, but it will be done in a controlled way, which allows repressed material, repressed memories, all kinds of traumas and deeply hidden symbols to come to the surface. Once they're on the surface, this repressed material can be analyzed, transformed, and integrated, similar to what happens in dreams or different psychedelic states. A lot of people who have tried holotropic breathwork will attest that these altered states resemble those induced by LSD, psilocybin, and DMT, and will allow you to experience serious time dilation, complete ego dissolution, absolutely incredible visions, deep catharsis and rebirth, as well as incredible sense of unity with the universe and connection to the divine. A truly magical tool of the unconscious to heal and reorganize itself when accessed safely. In a holotropic state, you're not just analyzing your problems, you're experiencing and resolving them through the body, psyche, and your soul. In this episode, I'll be discussing this and other adjacent matters with wonderful Kylea Taylor. Kylea is a California-based and licensed marriage and family therapist. She started studying with Stanislav and Christina Grof in 1984 and was certified by them as a holotropic breathwork practitioner in 1990. She worked with Stan Grof as a senior trainer in the Grof transpersonal training throughout the 1990s, facilitating and observing thousands of extraordinary state of consciousness sessions. Throughout her career, she observed that traditional codes of ethics didn't adequately address the altered states of consciousness that arise in breathwork and psychedelic-assisted therapy, and this led her to develop inner ethics, a self-reflective, self-compassionate, practitioner-centered approach to ethical care. She wrote a couple of fantastic books about it, which I'm going to list for you in the show notes. I've got no less than 20 questions for Kylea, so let's dive in and see what she has to say. You've had a rare and multifaceted career spanning traditional psychotherapy, transpersonal psychology, breathwork, and now ethics. When you look at the whole arc of your journey, what unifying thread or question has driven your life's work?
You know, everything I've been involved with since 1970 has been different methods or services that help people know themselves better. And when people know themselves better, they're in better position to do better at helping other people. So most of the methods I've been involved with were emerging methods, and they were not part of the main culture yet. So I've been involved with hotlines and peer counseling, and family group therapy at the beginning of that, and transactional analysis at the beginning of that. And it's kind of out of favor at this point. And I learned Gestalt therapy in the 70s and holotropic breathwork in the 80s and soul collage in the 90s. And now I'm working with a method that I've put together called inner ethics, which helps people be more aware of their everything that's going on inside of them. Yeah. I think the other thing I wanted to say about that is that all of these methods, to some degree, have involved extraordinary states of consciousness. We all have parts, we all have selves, and a lot of those selves go into the shadow because they're not socially acceptable. So I think extraordinary states of consciousness help us know about those selves and know about our motivations and our fears and desires and what triggers us. And when we know about these things, we're in a better position to do self-management, especially when we're in a responsible role.
In your book, The Ethics of Caring, you speak of the healing relationship as a sacred encounter. Now, that's a radical notion in clinical settings, really. Can I ask you what prompted you to reimagine professional ethics in such personal and relational terms?
I think it was pretty much my experience in holotropic breathwork. I really saw over and over again how the extraordinary state of consciousness dissolves the ordinary defenses. And when there's a responsible party assisting the experiencer, that person is in a special relationship, a special responsible relationship. They have a duty to protect the experiencer's vulnerability and to do what's in their best interest rather than what they want, and to serve the experiencer's need for protection because they're very vulnerable. So I had an experience when I first started being a trainer with Stan Groff as my mentor in the Groff transpersonal training. And in holotropic breathwork, facilitators usually go around at the start, before the start of the experience, and check in with all the breathers to see what they might need and whether there's any special issues. And I checked in with this one woman, and she came up to me and she grabbed my hand and she looked very directly into my eyes and she said, "Keep me safe." And this was a woman who, unusually, because it's not a usual breathwork experience, but she had been abused as an infant, and she went into an unconscious place where she couldn't keep herself safe. So it was an extreme example, and I realized that that's my job when I'm the facilitator. I don't have any other real job that's as important, but keep me safe is really important. So I think that trust that the client gives requires a really sacred commitment, that it's not unlike parenthood, that you always, even if the child is, whether the child's 4 or the child's 60, you need to put aside your needs when they have needs. I think that's really true.
When you first released your book to the public, what was the initial reaction?
Well, I had one reaction from someone who read the manuscript, and she said, "It's a good book, but could you call it something else besides ethics?" And I was stubborn. I said, "No." And I'm really glad I was stubborn because ethics is the issue. Ethics is about relationship. Right relationship is an ethical relationship. So that was, but it wasn't really, most of my teachers didn't think it was very important. Christina Groff thought it was important. Um, Jack Cornfield thought it was important. But it really wasn't in the culture that ethics was important back then. So there were people that read it and really got back to me and really liked it, and it grew in instead of, usually books sell a lot at first and then they trickle off. And this was different. It was the other way around. Word of mouth, people started buying it and using it.
When I was preparing for this interview, I had a look at some reviews that are out there, and I found quite a lot of comments from people who read your book saying that your writing is ahead of its time by quite a lot. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I think it was then, because I think now, I think the work in psychedelics is so profound and so disrupting of our, if we're a facilitator, it's disrupting of our idea of who we are and how good we are and all that stuff, that people are seeing the relevance of looking internally. Um, yeah, I think ethics has always been about standards of care and ethical codes and laws and am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Boundaries and that. And they're all important, but really looking at ourselves is crucial. So my work in inner ethics is about providing easy ways for us to identify what's going on with ourselves and to correct or repair or whatever, and provide a lot of compassion that we don't usually get in our field as professionals for ourselves and for others in our field, and supervisors giving compassion. And because I think we have to have enough compassion before we are willing to look at the things that might not be perfect, or we might not consider good or whatever, but those things are important to look at and know about. There's gold in there sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And that's what's missing in the currently dominant materialist scientific paradigm, which prioritizes data above all. You have coined the term inner ethics to describe your self-reflective approach to ethical practice. What are the core challenges that healers or guides face internally, and how does inner ethics help navigate them?
The core thing is whether my motivation, my trigger, my conflict of interest gets in the way of the experiencers or the clients, the person I'm working with or the group I'm working with. And there needs to be a way that people identify what that is. And so I've created some ethical awareness tools. There's about 5 of them, I think. Never counted exactly, but one is a chart that looks at all the motivations in different areas of life that you might have, and whether you have a fear or a desire that takes you off the track of right relationship in any one of those areas. And people really find that helpful. And there's one tool that's really very easy. It's just the question, who's this for? Which identifies if you're making an intervention, if it's for you, handing somebody a Kleenex when they really need to just cry really hard, or for them. They've got a lot of stuff and they're reaching for a Kleenex. So identifying which is really important, and identifying our triggers so that we are better at doing self-management when we're in the responsible party role. I like that term, responsible party. So we know when we're in it and we know when we're not in it, and we can act accordingly.
You've talked about this a little bit in the interview earlier today, but I'm wondering if you can expand. You spent decades helping people navigate non-ordinary states of consciousness, from holotropic breathwork to psychedelic therapy. So the question is, what does it take ethically and emotionally for a guide to meet someone in those spaces without overstepping or withdrawing?
Yes, I talked about this a little bit, but I think first of all, to just say that extraordinary states up the ante. Stan Groff talked about them as non-specific amplifiers of everything. So they amplify our internal emotions. They amplify the client's experience. They amplify the client's need for protection, all of that stuff. So if we get triggered, we might feel like, we might feel like we want the client to stop feeling bad. We might want to fix the client. So I think that would be overstepping when we get in there and try to help them with a Kleenex or with you don't have to cry about that. Some people do that with grief work. Not okay to cry. So when the facilitator is working, they're going to inevitably become activated at some point. Because when you're in the space of a non-ordinary state or an extraordinary state of consciousness, there's an energy field that affects the facilitator as well as the person who's experiencing. And so if you have tools and you have practiced using the tools, it's like a fire drill. If you've practiced using the tools, then you can come back to center and understand what's going on. And you also have to have enough supervised experience in those states with experiencers in those states, and also be the experiencer in those states to have a good idea about what the client might be needing in the moment and how to offer it, and how to tell, when you might make an encouraging sound, or when you might listen to their feelings of, well, maybe they shouldn't be going further right now, and maybe sit with what they're doing. So all that experience is really, really helpful. And we're all going to make mistakes as we go through the learning process. It's just the way it is. And yeah, so I think the apprentice model is really a good model to, have a group apprenticing. And so you see your peers making mistakes and helping each other. And you also get help from somebody who has a lot of experience, a mentor of some kind. Yeah. So you need all that. You need a lot of experience, and you need tools. I, mhm.
In your experience, did you come across clients who were inherently incompatible with this type of therapy at all? Did you have anyone where you had to say, this is not going to work, we actually can't do this? Is that a thing?
As experiencers, are
Yes.
they incompatible? Well, what Stan has said is people who are paranoid, who cannot work cooperatively with the facilitator. This is a practice in which you have to know that you're going to go through some hard things, probably, if you keep going in these states. And the preparation is important, but also feeling some trust in the person who's helping you is important. And people who are paranoid sometimes can't do that. And also people who have had a history of psychosis or breakdowns or hospitalization. The extraordinary state is powerful, and it might act as a trigger for. So that has to be investigated, the history, and that's part of proper preparation, that everybody fills out a medical form and a mental health medical form and has a conversation with the facilitator.
Looking back, what do you think the mainstream mental health field still misunderstands or perhaps fears about the deeper emotional and spiritual dimensions of healing work? You have been looking at the industry for a long time. What do you think is going on?
I think they don't understand the impact of relationship on healing, and of compassion on healing. And there are people in the psychedelic field now who are trying to find a way to not have therapy be part of to treat psychedelics as a medicine in themselves, and not have it be part of a ceremony or a relationship. And a lot of the traumas that we experience and sometimes heal in these states are about relationship. Things have gone wrong. People have been abused or not validated or not having the right experience, and they have the opportunity for corrective experience in a relationship. I don't think the medical field really understands that yet. I think there are more people in the mental health field and the medical field who understand it than they did 30 years ago. But I think there's a ways to go.
Do you think they don't understand the impact of relationship because the primary motivation in mainstream is ultimately profit? After all, relationship takes time and requires a different type of investment.
Profit and greed and money. And that's also the definition of success in our culture. So I think that all has to change in a new paradigm. Yeah.
Let's switch gears and talk about Stan and Christina Groff. You were a collaborator of Stan Groff for many years. When you think of him, not just as a theorist or psychiatrist, but as a human being, what stands out most? What do you think people often misunderstand about his character or even his motivations?
I think he was a pioneer and he was a scientist. He is a scientist, I should say. And he moved courageously with his curiosity. And Rick Tarnas always said about Stan that he had a radical trust in the human unconscious, a more radical trust than anybody had before him. And that trust was about the human unconscious knowing what needs tending, knowing what needs healing. And Stan called it the inner radar, but it's also been called inner healing intelligence or inner healer. He really found people's experience interesting. He would be the one sitting with the person when we were going through our training, who was still in process. He was, well, where is this going? What's happening? And he was brave enough to write all his observations down from thousands of psychedelic and breathwork sessions that he supervised. And I think one of the things he was also, when he was really more active in the field, was he was a transpersonal ambassador because he spoke multiple languages well, and he went around speaking about his ideas. And yeah, so I think that's it. I mean, he was honest enough to say, well, these are the things that happen with this. And this was outside the experience of everyone, except for those few people who were doing that work in the 50s and 60s. And he wrote about it, and he published about it, and he spoke about it. And I think that's was very brave.
As you well know, Stan began with a Freudian framework, but radically diverged after his LSD research. In your view, what was the pivotal moment or discovery that broke the spell of traditional psychoanalysis for him? And how did that set the foundation for holotropic breathwork?
Yeah, well, there's two things I think of about that. And one is the story he used to tell about an Adlerian therapist who was doing his analysis, and he noticed that the guy was falling asleep sometimes during the sessions. And so then he was brave enough to ask him, well, you fall asleep. And, oh, I only fall asleep when it's something unimportant. So he realized that the expert was making a decision, or his body was making a decision that maybe wasn't always true. So the other thing was his experience of taking LSD himself. And the person he was taking it with added strobe lights and he went so far out into the universe in that experience that he realized that his framework that he was using, the framework that everybody was using at that point, was just a very small part of what human experience could be. And he had seen everything out there from a huge perspective. So again, he was smart enough and brave enough to bring forward his data, which was controversial then and is now, I guess, mostly accepted in psychedelic and breathwork circles, at least. And the correspondence with the breathwork is at the end of the LSD and other sessions, he saw sometimes people weren't finished with their sessions, and he saw at the end of the sessions, they went into this spontaneous breathing, faster and deeper breathing at the end. And that brought them back into the extraordinary state of consciousness. And he saw that brought them to have experiences that brought them to completion if they were feeling that unfinished in some way. So I think about your question about why he used breath work. It was very practical. Psychedelics were illegal. And he had seen all the same experiences with both methods. I think every psychedelic has a little different tone, and breathwork has its own tone too. But any experience that your body needs to have was available in either method. And he had the consistent experience of seeing that people had experiences that changed their lives in those states. Yeah.
That's incredible. Graf called holotropic breathwork a technology of the sacred. Now, that's a powerful phrase. Can you unpack for us what it means experientially and why breath, music, and bodywork became the core triad of that modality?
Well, I think breath, music, and the body were very central to human experiences of ceremony for centuries. It was just they were used differently in different cultures. And using the technique of breath to induce an extraordinary state of consciousness is was used a lot all through those cultures. But the main thing is to have a safe enough setting and set that, and enough well-trained practitioners that it's a really good experience for people. And I think that's what Stan and Christina did so well, is that they found a way to do enough and not too much preparation and explanation that it worked. So the focused energy release work, which is what you call the body work in holotropic breath work, helps people fully tend to and release their physical tension or whatever blockages happen at the end. And it's like bioenergetics in a way, but it's different than anything else that other people use in psychedelics or breathwork. In fact, in psychedelic work these days, people are saying, oh, you can only touch the shoulder, you can only touch the hand or the foot. And we used to say, don't hold the feet because the feet want to express things. But they're learning different things now. But focused energy release work is usually only done at the end when tensions don't release normally in the process of the breath. And we learn a lot of ways to help the body express tension. Providing tension against tension. I think there's a word for that, but I can't think of it right now. But isometric tension. And to have some usually a lot of the tension is because of trauma, and to have some trauma-informed or trauma-trained practitioners is really important for that too. And trusting that inner radar, that inner healing intelligence, because things happen with the body in the breath work that look crazy. You know, if somebody walked in, we've had video people who just they couldn't believe what they were saying, you know, and they forgot what they were supposed to be doing, you know, for a TV show or something. Um, but if you walk in and see it, and then the same people 2 hours later or 3 hours later or 4 hours later are sharing in a very normal way with their peers about their experience. They're not crazy, but the body needed to do what it needed to do. Yeah.
Stan famously said that spiritual emergencies are often misdiagnosed as psychoses. In your facilitation work, what are the signs you look for that indicate that someone isn't breaking down but breaking through?
You know, I think the first thing that's important to say about this is the importance of screening, because psychosis might show up with careful screening, and it's important to know whether you're qualified to work with such a person. This has been done in mental health hospitals where psychiatrists were present and so forth with people with severe depression and psychosis, but it's not a good idea in an ordinary workshop to work with people. So, and it's also important to know if clients have a good support system. If what comes up for them continues to unfold and be worked with, do they have somebody at home who is going to care for them or be compassionate about it or understand it? So that's something that needs to happen in the screening. And it's important just to talk. We have an introductory talk in holotropic breathwork where you talk about some of the things that might come up, and that it's an invitation to enter a state that's not ordinary. But things can come up that you wonder if things are okay. So people have to be willing, you know, and then they're going to take the red pill, okay? And they have to be willing to do that. And that, if you have that agreement, you can go back to that and say, well, you know, I've seen this before. This is okay. If you want it, if it feels okay, just keep going with it and try it. And if it doesn't feel okay, we can stop. You can stop. One good thing about the breath work is if you stop breathing faster and deeper for a little while, it usually stops. And that doesn't happen when you take a pill. So, yeah, so that's the way we work. But what I want to say about the spiritual emergency at first is Christina was the one who identified the phenomena or that passage because she had one. She had a Kundalini spiritual emergency. And she doesn't get enough credit. It's probably not out on the web very much that she was the one that contributed to Stan's work. But she had a lot to do with holotropic breath work, how it came together as a program. And together they wrote the book, The Stormy Search for the Self, which talks about the various kinds of those passages that there are. So how I describe a spiritual emergency is that it's just like an extraordinary state of consciousness session, but it goes on longer than you expected the session to go on. And it may come and go, and it provides challenges and releases and benefits. And you just don't know how long it's going to go on and what it's going to bring and so forth. But it's like the whole system is getting reworked so that in the end it will be better, and you see benefits as you go along and you gain trust in that process. I also had one of these passages for about 5 years. And so, what signs do I look for to tell if there's a spiritual emergency that has a good chance resulting in a breakthrough instead of a breakdown? Is a really good question. And I look to see if there's a witness self, that you can talk about what's happening rather than just being in it, and a witness that hopefully sees and is assessing when it can the whole process and cooperation. So I think, and they're noticing the changes that are happening, and they're not locked into just experiencing without observing or creating meaning. And also, as I said before, they're willing to seek and accept help. Dr. David Lukoff, was instrumental in getting spiritual emergency added to the diagnostic and statistical manual, that the one that therapists use, the DSM-4, and that helped normalize and validate this particular phenomena. My own term for this spiritual emergency is personal paradigm shift, because some people react to the spiritual word. They say, this isn't spiritual. I'm just doing trauma recovery or whatever. So I think personal paradigm shift is more useful for that kind of person.
You said something very interesting about Christina. You said she didn't get enough credit for her significant contribution to the work. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think women are a marginalized group. And I think Stan was the one with the expert credentials. She was a yoga teacher. She was an artist. And she added music to the holotropic breathwork, and she did a beautiful job of that. And I think the culture focused on Stan. And she's very sensitive, and it was overwhelming to her at some point to be traveling around the world and constantly. Stan loved that, and for her, she was an introvert, and she started staying home and not participating in the trainings. So I think that's part of it too.
What was the interplay between them two? Did they complement each other?
I would say that she was a Capricorn and he was a Cancer. They were opposite in that astrological way. And I think she really helped him with his work.
That's really beautiful. One of Groff's major contribution is his expanded map of the psyche, including perinatal and transpersonal domains. What kind of resistance did he face from mainstream psychology, and how did he respond to critiques that he was veering too far from empiricism?
Well, he experienced a lot of resistance. And I think all true pioneers introducing new systems of thought, whether they're philosophical or psychological or scientific, experience that. And maybe it should be a badge of honor that they do get that from people that are entrenched in the current paradigm and haven't had the opportunity that he had to experience. And probably many people wouldn't have experienced what he experienced if given the opportunity. So lots of resistance. And your other part of the question, how did he respond to critiques? I think he just kept talking, and he learned to talk with a lot of data and a lot of information from anthropology, so that there was data behind the experiences that he was describing from anthropology, which was a science that people could understand. So I think that was helpful.
Let's talk about the music. Holotropic sessions involve carefully curated music to guide the entire process. What is the role of music in activating altered states? Can you maybe share how specific pieces are chosen and what a practitioner is listening for as the music interacts with the breath?
Yeah, I did a lot of that because I got very interested in that question. Prepared a lot of sets for workshops. I think the drumming, the beat, the kind of a strident thing at the beginning helps people get going with the breath, helps them breathe faster and deeper. What you're doing is not leaving a pause between the breaths. And sometimes that takes a little doing, and the drumming is encouraging. And then there's kind of a general experiential curve of whatever your epic is that you're experiencing. And so what you try to do is have something that doesn't have words that will be triggering in some particular way, and try to have something that will work for a group, not just one person. And there's a point at which everything gets more energetic. And then at the epic place, there's usually a place about 2.5 hours in, where an hour and a half in sometimes, where there's a breakthrough kind of music, where there's, okay, just things opening up. And then I always used words to describe musical pieces, so I would know what they did to my emotions. And then at the end, there's just integrative music, and then very meditative music at the end. And then the music stops, but sometimes the process continues. So I don't think music is necessary for the experience with the breath, but it's helpful. And it's helpful because if there's music, then you feel like you're part, the whole experiences of everyone are kind of woven together, and you're not hearing screaming on one side and laughter on another side. It's just covers up some of that. But if you do hear it, it becomes part of the soundtrack of your experience. So you don't use words, you don't use horror movie music. Jazz isn't particularly good. It's more, movie music that has an epic, a background to epics and drama. But it's not trying to get any particular experience out of people.
It sounds like you've experimented quite a lot with music.
Oh, a lot. Yeah. And we did breath work once a month for 11 years, my husband and I, we met in the first Groff training. So we did a lot of music. Now, what Christina used to do is to play things. She would use tapes and plug them in, one song, plug it in, given what she saw in the room and what she was feeling in the room. And that kind of modulated after Christina wasn't involved anymore into, there would be a sequence recorded that would be general enough so that it wouldn't get in anybody's way. And sometimes it did get in their way. And then we reviewed that and didn't use that again in that way.
That's super interesting. In your decades of facilitating, have you found that the breath has a kind of intelligence of its own, that it knows what to bring forward? How do you help people trust that what is arising is meaningful, even when it's terrifying or a little bit strange?
Yeah, I don't know if the breath is what's intelligence. I really don't know how that works. But there is some kind of intelligence that is operating. And people feel that. It's not just me. Over time, they see, if they look back, they see how that's worked for them, that there has been a purpose for them working on this thing first and this thing second, and so forth. I think the breath has a long history of evoking extraordinary states of consciousness, but whether it's the intelligence, I'm not sure. And you had another part of that question, which was like, what do you do when somebody's afraid? And I think that really comes with experience. And there's times when people's protectors are activated, and that's a good thing. There's some reason for that. And to know when that's the case and when it needs to be investigated further is important. And or when it's just, remember, you wanted to do this. You wanted to do this breathing, and maybe something is coming that you want to work with. So, do you want to experiment with breathing a little right now? Again, yeah.
Gross writing returns again and again to the death rebirth motif as a central transformational axis. In your experience, why does this archetype emerge so reliably? And what is its role in healing trauma or expanding consciousness?
Well, the rebirth motif is not only stands, but it appears in religions and spiritual experiences and all over the world, everywhere. So that said, I would say that Rick Tarnas, who's an archetypal astrologer and taught with Stan at the CIIS in San Francisco, he would say that Stan's astrological chart is filled with death rebirth archetypes, that he really is the spokesperson for death rebirth archetype, and he has been. But I think it's the big changes that are involved in death rebirth passages appear more frequently in people that are working with extraordinary states of consciousness, with spiritual emergency or breathwork or psychedelics, because it's when some key change happens, something that's no longer needed is lost, and then something unexpected and precious usually is found. And the first way we experience that is something that Stan's described a lot, is the perinatal, when, as the fetus, we are born, we become something very different. We become a separate little human being, which is not, it's not linear. It's like something very different. And maybe same thing happens when we die. We don't know. Anyway, I don't think you can have rebirth unless you have death. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. Or the solution.
Yes, right.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the post-session integration. What does meaningful integration look like after a profound session? How do you support people in taking the insight of altered state and embedding those insights into real-world change?
It's two really good questions, because I think integration is really key. I think a lot of people put a lot of importance on the psychedelic experience itself, but that's just giving you a lot of keys to work with to actually make the real world experience different for yourself. So I think all of extraordinary states of consciousness need to they pay a lot of attention to 3 parts, and that's the preparation, experience, and the integration. And it really helps for experiencers to have community, to be able to talk to others who have had these kinds of experiences, or to therapists who understand what is happening. There's a lot of people that are starting to have these experiences with psychedelics, and then they go back to the same therapist they've had for a couple of years, and they don't understand it at all. So what do? I don't have a support system I thought I had. So I think it's important for all therapists to get to know what that's all about. So yes, helping people with that, time in nature is important, meditation, just working on yourself, having groups, doing a regular practice of some kind. And you sometimes get that information in an experience. You get, well, do some meditation. You get that kind of idea. Or get out your drawing supplies, get out your art supplies.
Many people describe intense somatic phenomena during breathwork: shaking, weeping, tension, euphoria. How does holotropic breathwork approach the body as a site of memory and, as you said, release? Do you see this as a complementary to or distinct from somatic therapies like somatic experiencing?
I think it's complementary. Um, I don't know. At one point, Peter Levine, I think, thought that holotropic breathwork didn't have enough integration or do it in a careful enough way. And I think for some people that's true. There's some people I know that got more out of somatic experiencing because it was titrated in a way that they could metabolize it. But I think both methods work. Holotropic breathwork doesn't preference one kind of experience like somatic experience over another kind of experience that maybe you're going out into the universe, or maybe you're not really paying attention to the body, but you're becoming an animal, a wolf or something, eagle. So any experience that comes, any kind of experience that comes, is really trusted and encouraged to cooperate with. So that there can be out of the body experiences and psychic opening experiences and what people call past life experiences. People can have contact with their ancestors or loved ones who died, and they can do vivid memories of biographical situations, good parts of childhood as well as difficult ones. And people can have an experience of what I call thinking in a non-ordinary way. It's like a creative, focused thinking process that happens sometimes. And then there's yogic sleep states. That's a term that I coined from my study of yoga. I think what's happening is that the consciousness is turned off. You think you just had a experience of sleeping, and it was something happened during that time that you weren't ready to be conscious of. That sounds like it might not be true, but it might be true. Yeah. I think the inner radar is always on and usually can recognize an opportunity to work with what's unconscious.
That's really amazing. What happens when someone resists to what's coming up, or when something emerges that seems maybe darker than expected? How does a facilitator hold space for what Groff called the shadow material without trying to fix or maybe interpret it prematurely?
I think if one has long enough proper training, one gets more and more trusting of the inner healer, whatever that is, because you see that what happened worked in the sequence that it worked. So there's kind of what you come to is a belief that the inner healer knows best, and that the facilitator, me, really can't know what's going to happen, what should happen, and has to revert when they feel that they're leaning in that direction, that they should know, have to revert to their duty to hold space and protect and support the best interests of the client, which is really, the metaphor is acting as a midwife to whatever is emerging, not getting ahead of it. In brain spotting, which is a psychological method that I studied also, they talk about it as the client is the comet and the therapist is the tail of the comet. And their job is to follow whatever's happening with the comet. So I don't think there's any substitute for supervised experience and for enough personal experience also. And it's important to make pre-session agreements if people have fears about what to do at that point. How can we help? Have a contract about that.
In this culture of ours, which is increasingly obsessed with psychological safety, how do you defend a practice that can be disorienting or even overwhelming? Is holotropic breathwork safe, or is that the wrong framing entirely?
Well, that gets into the philosophical question: is anything safe? There's no absolute safety. In life, we're continually evaluating trade-offs between pleasure, learning, and full life versus safety, in quotes. And we're evaluating the risk reward of anything that we do. So I think an experiencer should investigate well any context that they're considering for profound work: the method, the setting, the set, the fee, the training of the practitioner, the references. There's a safety wheel that's available online that you might want to give people as a link. It's G.V. Freeman's psychedelic safety wheel. And it has a number of questions that you can evaluate your confidence about any aspect of the upcoming session. So it really puts the focus on information for the experiencer. And I think if the experiencer has good information and they really check in with themselves about each of those kinds of questions, about the facilitator, about the medicine, about whether they know enough about what goes on in this session and stuff like that, then they will be able to evaluate the risk reward. Because there's no safe container. There's only one in which you feel safe enough at the moment to do what you're needing to do or considering doing.
With psychedelics re entering clinical settings, some people have suggested that holotropic breathwork might be a legal psychedelic. But isn't it more than that? How would you respond to attempts to medicalize or reduce the practice to neurobiology?
Well, I think it's kind of nice to have an entree to extraordinary states that nobody's trying to medicalize. I think we talked about relationship being really important, and community is really important in holotropic breathwork. To have a sharing group at the end of the holotropic breathwork session where people can share what happened to them and hear what happened to their peers and feel validated. And then, oh, I'm not crazy. I had this experience, but they had that experience. And it's really important. So, and getting to a point of radical trust in the human unconscious that many experts don't have. They don't have that trust. And if they're honest, they don't really have trust that they know what's happening either. But maybe they don't know that. So psychedelics have the burden now of trying to be shoved into a medical or an academic paradigm and focus on neuroscience and not trusting the human unconscious. And the fact that they're trying to make sessions in isolation rather than in community, I really think, I used to tell people who said, well, do you do one-on-one sessions? I said, no, because I think the better way, it's less expensive, but it's still the better way, is to do it with a group. And so, yeah, I think that would be true with psychedelics to some extent. I think there's some times when it's important to do one-on-one sessions, but still in relationship with one-on-one practitioner.
Let's get back briefly to Stan and Christina. Looking back at Groff's enormous body of work, is there a part of his legacy you feel is under-recognized or maybe at risk of being forgotten in the popularization of transpersonal practices?
Yeah, I think that, thank you for asking that question. I think he has done a really good job of getting his message of trust in the human unconscious and expanded cartography of the psyche out there. He has books and lectures all over the world that have been out. I think he's all over the web. And the main thing in my mind that hasn't been recognized adequately is that Stan and Christina designed a really elegant, effective, pioneering training for practitioners who are going to be working in extraordinary states of consciousness. I can't say that enough. They were pioneers, and they have designed something that really works, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. It has been held to a consistent high standard for 30 years by Groff proteges, Carey and Tav Sparks, and they're still doing it. And there are a lot of practitioners who have taken a basic certification training in psychedelics are finding their way to this program so that they can have experiencing extraordinary states, and also sitting with supervisors who know that they can ask questions of later. So supervised sitting is really an important thing that the Groff training provides. So I think, I think that's what I would say, that they were pioneers in training, and that is undervalued at present.
This is the last question I have for you today. If the world took this work seriously, if holotropic breathwork were integrated into education, mental health, or rites of passage, which we don't have in our modern world, what do you think would change? What would we gain as a culture if more people had direct access to these inner experiences, or simply had awareness of them?
Well, I think from the people that I have known over time, over decades, who have done this work, that they've gotten to be better people, and they have a lot more compassion, and they have a lot more trust. And they're more interested in right relationship, whether they would call it that or not, with the other, whether the other is the natural environment, the earth, alien life, whatever it is. So I think that would probably be true if it was more prevalent in the culture. I think we have to be careful, though, when we're integrating methods into education, that we are also respecting the boundaries of those who are being educated. So I would not advocate mandatory breath work or mandatory psychedelic work or any other extraordinary state of consciousness method for anyone. That people have to be willing and be showing up to say yes to what they're doing with understanding. So I do have one experience that I remember, that somebody was in the training when I was a trainer, and he was a principal at an elementary school in Canada, and he had parental permission to do a little breathing and then have these kids who were having problem behaviors in elementary school do a little drawing after their breathing. Just a little breathing, not the full breathing thing. And kids don't have to do a full breathing. So, and then they talk to each other and the teacher about their experience. And what parents and the teachers, both groups, reported improvement in impulse control and behaviors. But I couldn't find that write up. It was a long time ago. And I think it would be interesting if parents were interested in that and the children were on board too. And you have to be careful because children don't know what they're agreeing to sometimes. To get more research with that, I think it might help.
Yes, that would be absolutely amazing. Kylea, tell us please, where can people buy your books?
Well, I have a lot of books on breathwork and 2 books on inner ethics now. And I just finished the other one. They're all available on Amazon, and they're all available from hanfordmead.com publishers. So what I tried to do with this last book I wrote was get everything about inner ethics into that book that I teach so that it would be really accessible. And it's available. Both of the ethics books are available in audio and print and Kindle. So I think you can find what you need to find and want to find on Amazon.
Great stuff. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes as per usual. Kylea, there's something incredibly soothing in your voice. It exudes a sense of trust for a reason I can't really explain. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the New Orchid Show.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm really glad that you want to get information like this out there on your podcast and you ask incredible questions.
You are too kind, Kylea. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you've learned something here today. I most certainly have. In altered states of consciousness, when people are vulnerable, disoriented, or processing intense emotion, which holotropic breathwork often brings up, the ethical burden on the facilitator increases. This is where Taylor's work is especially valuable. It helps facilitators stay grounded and avoid so-called spiritual bypassing, manipulation, or even energetic entanglement. Breathwork facilitators are taught to hold space, not direct. This non-doing role aligns beautifully with Kylea's emphasis on internal ethical awareness, being present, supportive, but not intrusive. If you're exploring holotropic breathwork as a sacred, even initiatory human process, then Kylea Taylor's work is a kind of ethical scaffolding that allows that sacredness to flourish without risk of harm. As always, you can find all the key links and references in the show notes. Thank you very much for tuning in, and see you next time.